Hello and welcome back to Briar Gaming. First of all, I'd like to apologise for the last video, which included the service to Papa 12. Due to an equipment malfunction, the HDR imaging went a bit squiffy and it was exceedingly dark, which hopefully I've now rectified. But anyway, today we are going to be taking a Class 66 intermodal service from Reading up to Acton. Now, if you've watched the last video, I'm a train driver in real life, and these are the sorts of trains that I drive on a daily basis. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be driving it as I would in real life. Again, I'll be going through setting it up. We're taking it over in service, so in theory there wouldn't be much to do, but I will walk you through as best I can what you do when you get on a Class 66, and hopefully you'll have a better idea of how it all works. So we're at Reading again, waiting for the train to arrive, but I don't think this lady's going to be able to get on it because it's not a passenger train, but here it comes. It's just come into view down there, and we're going to be getting on it up there, but there's a red signal at the end of the platform, so hopefully the driver won't go too far for the AI, and we'll be able to hop on it and get everything sorted as we hear a 166 pull away heading towards London. Well, it's the old EWS livery. 66038. Right, now when you take over a train in service, there are two things that I like to check before actually taking it forward, and that's that the taps, in this case, you'd have no brakes because those little red taps there should be down, which powers your brakes, and that the coupling and everything is correct. I'd also then check the fuel tank to make sure that there was enough fuel to get me to my destination, and then I'd also let the driver get off. And that door's taller than it is the door is actually taller in real life than that. So we'll close the doors. Right, we want to begin this service. 21 wagons, quite a short intermodal train. But yes, we want to drive this one. So it's due off at 08:41. So before we get started, we'll just do a few bits and pieces to enhance the interaction that we have with the train. So we're going to unisolate the DSD, and we're going to turn on the 24 volt supply, which, again, for those of you that can hear that beep and watch the last video, that is the AWS that we have just enabled. So everything appears to be in order. We've got all of the bits and pieces ready to go. We're in passenger mode for our brakes, which means that the brakes on the wagons release quicker because the wagons are rated higher. Just put the straight air brake in as we're in full service. We're just going to release that up to initial. Right, we've now been given a green signal to head towards Acton Yard. In real life, you have a PIN number which you put in there, which records everything that you do with the loco. What have we got going on here? Everything's on down there because it's a train in service. So, reverser to forward. Take our direct brake off. Back to the train brake. We release that. 2 notches of power to get ourselves going. Brakes have released. Waiting for the airflow to come back. Now the airflow indicates that the air that we've just put into the braking system to release the brakes has reached the rear, and it's come back to say that there's nothing going in. And in true train sim world fashion, we're not going anywhere. The perils of streaming. We're now going to have to troubleshoot why we're not going anywhere. Which is just like you'd have to do in real life, folks. So, oh, there we go. For some reason, come on. Happy to troubleshoot what's wrong. I think this is the whole traction power doesn't actually match real life. As well, because this train isn't particularly heavy, but it's I can assure you notch 3 we'd be doing a little bit more than this. But what I would do in real life is you'd use notch 2 to get the train moving up to about 5 to 10 miles an hour, and then you would notch on, what we call notch on, which is using the throttle handle there, because it's click, 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 click. We'd create power slowly but surely, making sure that the locomotive is generating amps, that the diesel generator is making the amps to then power the electric traction motors. Up here on the what we call the EM2000 screen, it tells you what notch and everything like that, just to give you an idea that everything's working correctly. Now, a class 4 train, which is what we're pulling, is allowed to go up to 75 miles an hour. So if the weight of the train is low enough and the engine is operating correctly, 75 mile an hour should be a possibility. But going on that start, it's a heavy one. Now, as you see the speed boards there, there's two different types. The 60 mile an hour at the top is for freight trains and trains that are not what they class a multiple unit. So from yesterday's video, or this morning's video, depending on when you've watched it, that was a multiple unit, so that was enhanced speed for that, which the MU on the speed board with the speed underneath it indicates that multiple unit can do 90. All other trains can do 60. So our line speed, the maximum speed we can go at the moment, even though our train is permitted to go at 75, is 60. So let's start taking power. Now, on the British Railway, on mainline running, it's different if you're on the underground, which would be another video completely. When the nose of your train passes the speed limit board, doesn't mean you can instantly go and accelerate to 60 miles an hour. It's when your last wagon clears that speed board that you are entitled to go at the permitted line speed. So with freight trains being so long, and it can take quite a bit of time for a train to go past the board for far enough so that the rear is in clear, as they call it, we have something called a train limit length, which is used in accordance with the Qtron data cord there, and you push that button and then you push it again and it gives you a countdown to when your train is clear of the point. So you push it when your nose goes past, and then when your tail's in clear, you get a beep, and that means you can go and power up, which we'll do now, because we've gone way past the 60 mile an hour board. Now, sadly, the game doesn't take into account that we are driving a freight train. It's saying that the line speed is 90 now on the speedo there, the little speed indicator. So yeah, it's not aware that we're on a class 4 freight train. 35 mile an hour, a 66 tends to go through power transition, where it goes into high gear, as it were, to allow for higher running. We didn't actually go through it for some reason on this particular model. I know the other version of the 66 that's on East Coastway does have it, and it drops the power off as the circuits transition to the correct mode of operation, and then they power back up again. But this one, for some reason, just carried on powering through. Because what would happen is the amps generator there would be around 2 kiloamps at the moment. It'd be down at 2, not 4. 4 is what you would have before transition. So in a Class 66, they're pretty much all the same across the fleet, with the exception of GB Rail Freight, who imported some from Europe, which have a slightly different control desk to what you see here. This centre pedestal doesn't exist, and this part of this part here comes down. It wraps sort of a wrap-around desk for different sort of power handle, power switches and stuff. Personally, I prefer to drive the what they class as Euro spec. Tends to be a little bit more convenient with all of the controls within arm's reach, whereas if it starts raining on one of these, you have to lean across to turn your windscreen wiper on both sides, and if you want a cup of tea, you've got quite a way to lean over to turn your hot plate on. Alright, so we're still on a 60 mile an hour bit of track here, but as you can see, we're just getting up to 55. Nice set of wagons, no bleed off, no leaky air. We're running on greens, which is a little bit unusual for a freight train. Normally we're up behind a passenger train, and we're getting yellows and restrictive aspects where risk-triggered commentary comes into play. As the line speed on this bit is 60, it's going to throttle back until we see a speed board, and we know whether we can increase to 75. Because like I say, even though the speedo there says 90 in the bottom right hand corner, that was for the multiple units. So normally, after taking over a train in service, you would do what is called a running brake test to check that the brakes are working and you know how they feel when they apply. So what we'll do now is we'll just tap the brakes into initial, and we want to aim to bring the speed down by 10 miles an hour. We then want to release the brakes to make sure that the train rolls freely and doesn't continue to slow down. Because if it continues to slow down, then there is a problem somewhere in the train with what we call a dragging brake, which could be that the brake blocks haven't released off the wheels properly due to an imbalance in the distributor, which we can resolve on the move with a brake overcharge, as long as we're not going to touch the brakes again for 6 minutes while it bleeds off, because what it does is it puts more air into the system, so that the distributors become overcharged, ironically, hence the name, and that pushes air in and expands all the brakes up so that they all release off the wheels, and then in theory they settle back down to their regulated 5.1 bar, 5 bar, which should in theory release the brakes from the wheels. Worst case scenario is it could be that a handbrake has been left on somewhere on the train and hasn't released the brake blocks off the wheel, and they're being held on by a mechanical wind. So as you can see, the train's rolling nicely. The airflow indicator, which is this one here, is reporting that the air is still balancing out from having made the application of the brakes. And Normally what you do is when you get on, you check to see where that little needle sits, so that you know whether the air is still being pushed into the system. Normally wagons do tend to leak a little bit of air, so you do tend to have some litres per second going in at all times. But again, that's a fail-safe system, so if it suddenly shoots up to 10 and the brake pipe control indicator here suddenly applies the brakes and pressure drops off, then you've got a problem, which you're going to have to ring the signaller and say, excuse me, got a problem. And then you'll have to troubleshoot. Right, so now that's out of the way, and we're rolling quite nicely, we'll start to take power again, nice and slowly, so that you don't overload the engine and blow up the generator. Because if you go in the red here, it means that the engine is working excessively hard to generate the electricity you're requiring to power your traction motors, which you don't want to flash over, because your engineering fleet team won't be too happy. So I tend to take power 2 notches at a time to give me the amps and the acceleration I require. We'll just go through a few more bits in the cab of this Class 66. So we've been through the EN 2000, we've been through this, what's called the Qtron. We've got our TPWS system here, which again works similar to the one in the 166. This is the TPWS 3 system. If you go over the grids or anything, you get the red light activated there, miss your DSD, whatever, AWS will activate. Train stop override gives you permission to push that from the signaller, and you can go past the signal of danger. And then this yellow one in the middle is if you isolate it when working on an engineering site, it illuminates to tell you that you've got a fault because you've isolated, or if a fault is generated with the system, that will flash. Where the little white dot is on the screen at the moment, that's a speaker for the GSMR, so that you can hands-free with the signaller should it be required. Here is like a little warning lights panel, like if you were in a car, for example, you'd have your warning lights and everything here. There's brake tests there to say that you're testing your brakes, so you've locked out the system and that the brake system is not live. You've got fire isolation detection, so if you isolate your fire protection in the engine room, that will illuminate there to make you aware. And then you've got wheel slip and other bits and pieces, just to give you some notification that there is a fault somewhere in the system, or if you're encountering wheel slip, it will flicker. DSD. So this panel here shows which headlights you've got on. So the furthest at each end is the marker lights. The middle one is the top light, which is up there. Then got your night light, and then you can see another white light illuminated there. That's your day headlight. And then the other two closest to the centre one are your tail lights. So if you were to put them on, it doesn't work in this one unfortunately, but you'd get 2 red lights come up there to indicate that you're on, your tail lights are on. Just going to power off because I think it's still a 60 here, and we've gone over a little bit, which is a bit naughty. Again, for talking to you guys. But behind here you've got your fuse cabinets and where all your troubleshooting bits and pieces are. So we're in the number 1 end. It's the larger cab, the number 1 end. You've got more room. One. Most important piece of equipment is just there, grey bit. That's your cab heater, which is an electric fan heater, as these do get quite cold and drafty. Alright, we've got a AWS horn for 60 mile an hour speed, so we were on a 75 mile an hour bit of line, a little faster. So we're approaching a 60 mile an hour permanent speed restriction. apply a bit of brake and get the locomotive and the train to 60, and then we can just roll. We're going downhill. Okay. So going back to the controls, you've got your parking brake release and application buttons there, with the indicator in the middle to say whether your handbrake is on or off. Or your parking brake, i.e. your handbrake. You've got your overcharge button, your engine start and your engine stop buttons. You've got your instrument dimmer, which powers how bright your lights are. You've got your window wiper, 60 mph section of track. You've got your hot plate controller, so you can turn on your hot plate, make a cup of tea, or heat the soup up, hot chocolate, whatever tickles your fancy. Up here you've got your cab light buttons, your instrument lights, your tail lights, your headlight switches, your demister and your brake test. That's a plug under there, an American style plug for powering your iPad or charging your phone when in a yard or siding and you've got to spend a little bit of time sat on your train. But yeah, that's about it for a Class 66. Nothing luxurious. Right, so we're back on 75 mile an hour bit of railway, so we'll slowly start to take power again. Oh no, it's 60. Come on, signaller puts out the file so that we can open it up. Class 66 is the workhorse, freight workhorse in the United Kingdom at the moment. There have been some new arrivals since the Class 66 arrived. So the go-to locomotive for freight companies, the Class 68, which are in operation with DRS, Trans-Pennine Express, Chiltern, and direct rail services, which is DRS. We've also got the Class 70, by Colas or Freightliner, but mainly a freight train will be hauled by Class 66 intermodal duties due to the nature of the gearing, which allows it to 75 mile an hour running. Other traction available, Class 60 for example, will generally pull fuel trains, coal trains, things like that along routes. They're limited to 60 miles an hour. Right, so let's get back into the cab. Again, we're 60 mile an hour along here. So like I said in my previous video, if anybody's got any questions, queries, wants to see something done on the stream, then please do leave a comment below the video and I will aim to answer that in the next video after it. And if I am unable to answer it, I'll get you the answer so that you are enlightened and gain some knowledge and learn something from these videos. So that noise you can hear now, the ying, 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 is the traditional Class 66 idling sound. They're known as ying yings, sheds, because of the way they look. But they are blooming good locomotives and they do work well within certain parameters when you don't try and put 2,200 tonne up a hill, but that's another story for another day. Very good locomotives to drive though, very easy to get to grips with, very easy to try and troubleshoot and find faults, cut your teeth with as a new driver. see the weight of the train is slowing us down a little bit as we go. But that could be for a number of reasons. So what we'll do is we'll just do a brake overcharge. You can see the needle there is shot up to 5.6 bar. That needle has gone through its pumping air into the system. We'll now have to hope we don't need to use the brakes, because if we have to use the brakes now, the locomotive will just immediately go back to 5.6 bar until it's bled off, because it's trying to balance the braking system. So hopefully, fingers crossed, we shouldn't have to use the brakes. So while we're poodling along here, what I will do is we'll go to the EM2000 and we'll have a little look through that. So what you've got here is a digital display showing you everything you need to know about the locomotive performance. So you can have unit information. The wall's a little bit throwing me off here. So it'll give you the unit number. So this is DB Schenker 66038. The ID of the EM2000, which is individual to each one. The time of day for the scenario, how much fuel you've got. It's doing well to have that much fuel in it, because they don't actually carry that much fuel. So, it could be 6400 tank. But again, it's come from somewhere a long way away, so it'd have less in it than that. You've got your English speed. You can change it to kilometres an hour if you want to. You've got traction cut out. Now on a real EM2000 there is a lot more options than this available. Let's go back to driving. 60 mile an hour piece of railway again though, so chill along here. Okay, what's the speed on this? 60. We will only be able to do a maximum of 60, as we are a freight train. Now, as you probably heard me at the beginning, I said, 21 wagons, that's quite a short intermodal service. Now, intermodal wagons on a train, generally, you have between 25 and 32 in a set. And each wagon is split into, depending on the type of wagon, there are many different intermodal wagons. But most of them can take 3 20-foot containers, or they can take a 40-foot and a 20-foot container. Or certain wagons can be set up to take 45-foot containers. But generally, you can have 60 feet's worth of wagon boxes, like container boxes, on a wagon. Again, they are weight limited, so you can't just put 3 20-foots on to make 60 foot if they're all really heavy. There is limits to that. What those limits are, I can't remember off the top of my head. I'd have to ask one of my ground crew colleagues to answer that question for me, because they have to be evenly spread out, bits and pieces like that on the wagon. So we're just going over 60 mile an hour, so we'll just power off on the throttle. A little bit of a roll as we're going uphill, which should remove our speed, bring us back into sync with what we're supposed to be doing on the line. But again, we're looking out for the 75 mile an hour board, or a board that indicates that we can increase our speed. The ironic thing is all the crossovers over to the fast lines are 70 mile an hour that we've seen so far. But we can't actually go across them at 70 because the train's too long. But they're aimed at passenger trains. Still waiting for a speed indication board. Still got 11 miles to go to Acton. Going in the yard with this intermodal. Normally you go along to Acton Mainline and off up onto the North London line, where the train would either go off up to Birmingham, to Landor Street, Hams Hall, East Midlands Gateway, Daventry, Birch Coppice. There's quite a few different yards. Or it could be going to one of the ports, London Gateway, Port of Felixstowe, Tilbury. So there's many places that the intermodal trains can go. From Acton you can go up to the North London line, round to the West Coast Main Line. Or you could even go down towards Southampton, via London if you wanted to. That would be via Clapham Junction, so you'd go over towards Olympia, Kensington Olympia and all of that, along the North London line a bit that way. Not a way I've ever been, but I'll sign it. Right, so now that the brakes have bled off, you can see that that has returned to 0, which indicates that there is no air being pumped into the system and it's holding its pressure. We can now use the brakes normally again. Come on, give us a speed indication board game, please. Come on. Those speed boards don't apply to us because they're on the left hand side of that line to our left, so they are applicable to that only unless there's an arrow to say it comes across to ours. But again, it would need to be on the left hand side of this running line that we're on, which is the up slough. That's an alert for a speed warning, 60 again, 70 going across. Points aren't set to go across. Split distant, again, not applicable to us. We take the higher route, which is the green one, the main route. See, 70 mile an hour across the crossing, but we can only do 60 mile an hour. Oh no, we've got 85 now, so apply the power. Now push the train length button. So in theory we may get a beep when our train crosses that point we've just done. So we'll stay at 60 mile an hour for a minute and see if we get a beep. If we do get, there we go. So that beep then, although not authentic, but that was a beep to say that the rear of the train had passed the point where I'd hit the button. We can now increase our speed to 75 miles an hour. So Class 66 has 7 notches of regular power, and then it has sort of I need more power, like an overload button, like power notch, where you have to pull that throttle handle out a little bit and push it forward into notch 8, at which point it will engage the turbo and everything like that and provide you with more power to allow you to accelerate harder and get up to a speed a little bit quicker than normal. They're designed to run in it all the time if needed, but I try not to anymore. I try to get up to a speed and then put it into notch 7 so that the engine's not stressed all the time. Especially if I'm on flat and level ground, because the locomotive and the train should in theory roll. The resistance should be less. You shouldn't need to constantly be accelerating. So speed is still 85 on this section of line for all other trains. We shall continue to aim for our 75. As we get up to 70, we'll just power it back to notch 7. Just roll ourselves into power towards Acton. Again, when like I power on 2 notches at a time, I'll also power off 1 notch at a time. Because if you go from full power to no power, the 66 tends to go into a protection mode and shuts the engine down as you've created a problem within the engine for the crankcase and altered the pressure quite quickly, which then shuts the engine down, and you can't restart the engine until engineering have said it's okay to do so. And then that means you're stuck out on the main line. So just gently notch on and off the power. Went down 2 notches by accident, pressing the button there. But we're at 73 mile an hour, we're starting to come up towards Acton now. So in real life you would have a marker that you choose on the railway that's a permanent feature of the railway infrastructure, so a signal number, or a bridge or a station where you decide to start slowing your train down when you know that you're going to be going into a yard or a siding, or you might be booked a particular stopping point and you know that it's in your running schedule. And you'll have ideas of where your braking points are for that. So you throttle off and then you just roll. And again, I don't sign this bit of railway in real life, so I'm going on the guides that Game are giving me. So when we get to 1.5 miles from our destination, I'll gently apply some brake and slowly start to bring everything down. But the signalling could bring us down. You can't just go barreling into a yard on a green. You'll be slowed down in theory on approach to that, and then the final signal before you go in could go to green, but they should slow you down. The signals team should slow you down before you get there. Right, so what we're going to aim to do now is we're just going to bring the speed down to 50 miles an hour, so an initial brake application. 4.6 bar of pressure still in the braking system, but we're on to 60 mile an hour there. So we are technically speeding at the moment, but the game doesn't see us as speeding. That's a warning that we're going to go into a yard that's got 30 mile an hour. It's a 30 mile an hour crossing, so we're just going to have to bring ourselves down a little bit quicker here. So 4 bar of pressure being applied to the brakes. We're taking it out. Again, normally you'd have flashing yellows to go into a yard or a siding. Right, so now we've got 2 yellows with a number 1 indicator. So normally we get flashing yellows down to that. We were going into the yard so that we would bring our speed down and everything like that. Unfortunately, because Train Sim World doesn't support flashing yellows on the UK network, we don't get them. But I believe they're looking into bringing it in, because there is a team now at Dovetail Games that is working on improving the preserved collection, which is the older routes like this one, so that we can enjoy new features and everything that comes with the route itself. Maybe even some upgrades to the route. They haven't said whether they're going to be doing anything like that. Right, so we're going on to the relief, I think it is, because we're not actually going into the yard, but the relief line. Bringing it into a siding now. Turn off our headlights. Hard work, so we don't blind any of the ground staff. But in real life, unless you've brought this train out of the port or the place where this has started, you wouldn't technically have a crew change here with the company I work for. You would probably have a cup of tea, have a little break while you await the forward movement, the signal to clear and everything like that. But maybe DB do a driver change here, as this is one of their trains, as it is their yard as well. So normally you would not stop here, so what we'll do is we'll take it up to the signal. At the end, unless instructed to by ground staff, stop at a certain point. Well, we better stop actually, otherwise the game will fail us. But normally you take that off up to the signal that you see up ahead of us. There we go. That's 408. To Acton. Thanks again for watching, and like I said, any questions or queries, drop them in the comment section and I'll answer them in the next video. Take care.